So what are you saying under optimization? You're saying under optimization that it uses a factor model to match the factor exposures, to match the factor exposures of the fund, to those of the index, to those of the index. It can also incorporate an objective function. It can also incorporate an objective function, where the tracking risk is minimized, subject to certain constraints. So what are you saying again for optimization? Simply saying that it uses a factor model to match the factor exposures of the fund to those of the index. It can also incorporate an objective function where the tracking risk is minimized subject to certain constraints. There. So what are you saying under optimization? So we come up with a factor model like so. Y is equals to B0 plus B1 x1 plus B2 x2 plus B3 x3 and plus an error term over there. These ones represent independent variables. They are the ones that influence this value over here, which is saying dependent variable. This one is dependent on the performance of these ones, or the movement of these three, x1, x2, and x3. These B1, B2, and B3 represent factor sensitivities or exposures to the factors that contribute towards maximizing the returns of Y over here. So we're saying that we try as much as possible to match the factor exposures of the fund to those of the index. So we select securities that are representative to those of the index, and we try and identify the factor sensitivities like that, and then we come up with an objective function like so, of the form like this, that can be able to maximize the returns, or that can be able to emulate the returns of the index. The error term over here is what we're saying the factors that are not included in the model. So if x1, x2, and x3 are not contributory towards earning returns similar to the index, then we are saying they are going to be explained by the error term right over there. And so we will need to, as much as possible, try and identify all of the factors or explanatory variables that are contributory towards tracking the index. Optimization. You use a factor model to maximize or to optimize the portfolio, or to try and make the portfolio earn a return similar to the index. Additional concepts can be used, including Sharpe ratios. You can be able to try and compute the Sharpe ratio of the index, so that now you can be able to try and ensure that the returns or the Sharpe ratio of the index should be similar to the Sharpe ratio of this function over here. So you're saying you can be able to come up with a Sharpe ratio over here, then you try and identify what combinations of these securities which are in the index can actually lead towards that Sharpe ratio that is over there. So we're saying that those are some of the models that can actually try and help portfolio managers earn returns similar to the index. Remember, we're looking at indexing a portfolio, how a portfolio manager can be able to try and index a portfolio. Now that there's a